Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This will be the last of 3 webinars in a series on the future of educator learning that iNACOL and Two Revolutions have and are putting on right now. So I'm Natalie Truong, Policy Director at iNACOL. We also have Adam Rubin and Ali Brown from Two Revolutions and Wendy Baker from Southern New Hampshire University with us. And you can see our photos of all the presenters here and our titles. So as we're just getting started, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box, share your name and where you're joining us from. And we'll keep moving on. Thank you. So a little bit about iNACOL. We are a nonprofit dedicated to transforming education to student-centered learning. We're connected to educators and school districts leading innovation in education and implementing student-centered learning practices. And we invite you to learn more and to engage with us at the iNACOL 2019 Symposium in Palm Springs. And it will be at the end of October. So if you haven't registered yet, we look forward to seeing you there. And my contact information in case you want to tweet anything at me during the webinar today. And with that, I'll turn it over to our presenters to introduce themselves and their work and organization.
Okay, excellent. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Adam Rubin, and today we have the pleasure of talking about an issue, an opportunity, something we're really excited about as we look across the field. It's really thinking differently about partnerships with higher ed to push for personalized competency-based education. So, briefly, I'm a founder and partner at Two Revolutions. We are a national education design lab, which my wife still can't describe 11 years in, but I am very clear what that is, which means that we don't come into communities with the answer. We really use design as a way to unlock a community-generated vision for what the future should look like, and then we help support the development of school models, both K-12 and higher ed, as well as work on the systems side. We have 3 kind of deep areas we focus. We work across the country to help transform schools, usually full school models and sometimes networks within schools as a way to kind of seed transformation. We work with systems leaders, primarily states and districts, primarily districts now, to really think about the conditions that enable and the conditions that are inhibiting that level of change. And then we work increasingly with a experienced design team to really grow capacity in the schools and systems where we do our work. And we do our work lots of places around the country. All right, and values I know are important to all of you. I know some of you I'm seeing in the chat would value spring. Sitting in northern Vermont the way a couple of us are, I can commiserate with the blizzards and the snow, but finally the buds have come to the trees here. So from an organizational value perspective, when we think about professional learning, we really have established 3 core values from our perspective. When we partner in districts and states, we focus on building deep capacity. Our goal is obsolescence in those partnerships. There's a ton of high quality training and across a continuum to less high quality training. And we believe that that has a lot of value, but from an organizational values and purpose perspective, we try to partner deeply to build local capacity, which often looks like co-facilitation with instructional coaches, central office team, etc. We believe in this idea of a continuum of learning. Far too often we see professional learning as really fragmented and incoherent. Do an event, we talk about what happens before the event and what does the application of learning look like afterwards. And then finally, and we're going to go deep on this today, we think learning needs to be relevant and job embedded for our K-12 educators. So we really try to focus so much of our work and so much of our capacity building on felt needs versus folks learning at a workshop here or something there that isn't really grounded in their practice and their specific needs. All right, and I am joined on my right, your left, by my colleague and partner from Southern New Hampshire University.
So I'm Wendy Baker, and my role is as the Executive Director of the Division of Special Programs and Advanced Study at Southern New Hampshire University. SNU, as we affectionately refer to her, is a large, dynamic, innovative university that has many different parts, and competency-based education and partnership-driven work is central to almost everything that we do. So we're really pleased to be able to have the opportunity to partner with two revs. We appreciate the opportunity to think together and be innovative in our approach to some traditional conversations in innovative and opportunistic ways. So we look forward to sharing more today as the presentation continues.
All right, very briefly, we have three objectives for today's conversation. First of all, Natalie will give us a lens into what the landscape looks like around innovations in educator credentialing and higher ed partnerships to push and support and catalyze and competency-based personalized learning. Wendy, Ali, and I are gonna spend a chunk of time going deep on an active case study. You know, we have launched a new model. We're excited, we think it's disruptive, and you know, a focal point in this conversation is going to be looking at graduate learning and the potential for partnerships between higher ed and K-12. And then we're going to give you a chance, working with peers, to consider how graduate learning, credentialing, like what are your needs locally? What ahas emerged for you in this conversation that you can take back, and then we'll ask you to share that out with the whole community on the call. All right, so our agenda very briefly is we're going to touch on the national landscape in a minute with Natalie. Then I'll provide some context for how we got started in this partnership with SNU. There was a felt need that we had in the state of New Hampshire and nationally that emerged. Then we'll go deep on the program design to give you a lens into what does this actually look like in practice in these early phases of this collaboration. And then we'll want to give you an opportunity, as I said a minute ago, to process your takeaways and think about some new learning opportunities beyond this. All right, I'll let you read these. Muting video and chat. So Zoom allows all three, and we're going to use a fourth function called breakout rooms at a certain point in the conversation where you'll get to collaborate with 3 or 4 peers in your own space. Just, you know, a meta moment for us. We try to, in lots of what we do, model personalized competency-based deeper learning for adults, and having all of us talk at you for 60 minutes probably is less of a learning experience for you. So we're going to give you an opportunity later in the call for that. And Megan's just put in the chat some Zoom tips. All right, Natalie.
Great, thank you. So can you advance the slide, please? So a little bit about the national landscape. There's something that we often show on our webinars that I did include. We're in the process of updating our Competency Works state policy map. And currently, as we've updated it, almost all 50 states today have some sort of supportive policy for competency-based education in K-12. So the question really is, what does that mean for higher education and institutes of higher ed to train educators and credential them to be prepared for these innovative learning models where seat time might not be the way that it's always been anymore. So at the heart of the work that we are doing is redefining student success for student-centered learning. And in order to transform current K-12 education systems to student-centered learning, it requires rethinking educator credentialing, and we need to prepare educators with the specific knowledge and skills that they need to be successful leaders and collaborators in personalized competency-based learning environments. So that's a little bit of our vision. And why transforming educator preparation and credentialing is so important is that even though there's been a lot of progress in terms of state policy across the US, very few educator preparation programs focus on the competencies and the roles needed of an educator in a learner-centered model. So more often than not, teachers are trained and credentialed in the US are focused on delivering academic content within traditional seat time learning models. And how can we expect educators to then lead in learner-driven models when we are not preparing them to do that? And since competency-based education opens up possibilities for educators and students to go beyond the four walls of the classrooms and beyond the time-based, grade-based systems and structures, it also requires educators to reimagine their roles as facilitators and co-owners. And so we'll go on to the next slide in terms of what this means for students. Since teachers help to set the conditions for learning in schools, it's crucial that they have the tools that they need to go design learning environments and experiences with students and the capacity to meet students where they are. So I'm very excited to actually hear about the collaboration that two reps and Southern New Hampshire University are working on with that. And finally, the last thing I'll say about the need to rethink educator credentialing is that right now we're focusing a lot in terms of state policies to create multiple high quality pathways for high school, secondary students to graduate and enter higher ed in the workforce. And in the same way, educators need multiple high quality pathways to credentialing, advancement, and development. So this means that educators often take on new roles as they collaborate to design customized pathways for graduation for every student, and that state credentialing systems and structures are based on grade and content areas that don't account for these new personalized competency-based learning models where educator roles and responsibilities are differentiated to create flexible, dynamic systems to meet the needs of students. So if we are asking teachers to be co-creators with students and for students to drive their own learning, that means that we need to allow educators to drive the policy, the culture, and the decision-making. In our recent report with Catherine Casey, we developed a vision for the future of teaching profession that is lifelong, learning-centered, and equity-oriented. And that's in our report here that you can see. So these are just some of the tenets around what it looks like to reimagine educator learning and preparation. So some key trends in educator credentialing that we've seen over the past few years that are holding promise is, first of all, not within institutes of higher education per se, but a lot of nonprofits and programs are working on micro-credentials such as Digital Promise that can allow for assessing and credentialing key competencies for educators in student-centered learning systems. For example, creating digital badges upon demonstrating mastery of skills in innovative learning models, like how to create formative assessments. And just like students, educators need an array of high quality pathways to meet their personalized professional needs and entry into teaching. So if you've demonstrated 10 years of relevant work experience in a field, there should be a pathway for you to be able to demonstrate these knowledge and skills and get the pedagogy needed to be an educator. So creating multiple pathways for educators is also a developing trend. Additionally, teaching candidates through internships and community-based experiences can experience teaching hands-on in controlled environments to gain the skills that they need to meet the needs of educating students. So that has looked like job-embedded training, mentorships, and something like creating design labs that some universities are working on. So the MIT's Teaching Systems Lab is an example of a design lab, which allows teaching candidates to establish collaborations with other teachers within their education program, within school districts, and within research institutions to design and test these innovative learning spaces. And the last thing is developing competencies for educators. And these 4 domains of educator competencies come from some research and work that CCSSO and Jobs for the Future have put together that focus on the cognitive, interpersonal, and instructional competencies, a set of competencies that educators will need in order to lead in student-centered learning environments. And you can click on the report and learn more about their work there. So that's just kind of a highlight around why teaching credential is so important and need to be revamped right now. Not a lot of institutes of higher education are doing that, but there's such great opportunity given the K-12 field that's growing in competency education. And we invite you to just browse our resources and learn from the other experts today who are going to speak about their work. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Natalie. So I wanted to share, and it's interesting to hear those trends and what iNACOL is seeing, just kind of where this Southern New Hampshire Two Revolutions partnership emerged. So Ray McNulty, who was the former Dean of the School of Education at Southern New Hampshire, and I and a bunch of other leaders from K-12, higher ed, and the workforce were working with the state of New Hampshire pretty deeply to help scale competency-based education. And this was probably at this stage 4 years ago, 3 and 4 years ago, we were having these conversations. And we saw 3 major problems. So Ali, if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So, you know, these were key challenges that emerged, and they echo lots of what Natalie just shared. The idea that educator learning was time-based rather than learner-driven. Our educators didn't have mental models or training that were encouraging them and supporting them in making a transition themselves. This idea that in lots of pre-service and in-service, knowledge acquisition was really kind of still what they were being asked rather than looking at the skills and dispositions that were needed in the field. And then the credentials available were not aligned with demand. So in the state of New Hampshire, you have a state that since 2005 has been pushing aggressively toward competency-based education and really growing in that direction. And yet leader after leader could not find the teachers, could not find the leaders for buildings that were educated in that way. And, you know, here are some quotes that emerged as we were kind of percolating on this model. Just a real gap in how will I know how to hire the teacher force and the leaders I need in my district? You know, we were wanting to work with the Professional Standards Board of the state. Politically, the thinking was maybe it would be more nimble and more successful if a large university could move quicker and more creatively to put pressure on the state. And that was really kind of what the initial kind of driver for the creation of this program was. What if an innovative higher ed partner collaborated, you know, with an innovative national professional learning provider, education lab, and what if we actually created something with the goal of putting pressure on a different credential from the state, from the Professional Standards Board, putting pressure on peer higher ed universities, higher ed institutions to really head in this direction and meeting greater demand. So that was really the front end story. I think a second part really echoes lots of what Natalie shared from a national perspective. So much professional learning that we see in K-12 pre-service certainly, and in service is really what is the content? We use whatever process is necessary, and will I be evaluated on this? So we really wanted to think about a shift from a traditional PD to a much more transformative professional learning opportunity that really uses an innovative process. In this case, a focus on a competency-based and personalized learning experience for the educators, uses that as a way to hook educators, intrinsically motivating them to learn where they're trying to go, and then use that as a vehicle to deliver content. And Ali, in a few minutes, will speak in depth to the content that this program is trying to convey. But I think, you know, a core headline here is we wanted a program, we wanted to collaborate with Southern New Hampshire to build a program that used innovative pedagogy and innovative content in an integrated way. And then finally, you know, and this will not be lost on any iNACOL audience, the world is changing and work is changing, and we, you know, consistently see the need to support a transformation. So work looks different today, very different than it used to, but obviously schools look more similar. So really giving our educators an opportunity for a lived experience that allows them to accelerate what's happening in their districts where this work is happening. And then lots of districts that we're beginning to work with are early in this journey and want to build a vanguard of talented teachers and building leaders and systems leaders to do this work. So we feel really blessed that we have the opportunity to collaborate with Southern New Hampshire. Southern New Hampshire and Two Revolutions are very different entities, but the common denominator is we're both disruptors. We're both entrepreneurial, and we're both trying to change the face of education. So we will briefly speak to the program design. So there were kind of 4 core design principles that we partnered with Southern New Hampshire and a set of national experts to really flesh out as the foundation for this model. Ali will walk us through those principles conceptually and then show you tangible examples of work that's emerging from our cohort.
Great, thank you, Adam. So I'll walk through these design principles and provide some conceptual overview and then some particulars with the program to see this as kind of a case study within the larger content of today's webinar. So first and foremost, we really wanted to walk the talk and provide an immersive competency-based learning experience for educators so that they no longer had that disconnect. Well, I learned this way, and I'm expected to learn and to teach my students and create a different experience for my students that's very different. Now we can give them an experience to really hang their hat on so that the transfer from more traditional models to more personalized competency-based models feels a lot easier. So the first thing we did is start by developing competency frameworks. And what Natalie showed us earlier, that was the iNACOL Educator Competencies for Personalized Learning were a really helpful resource for us there. So we wanted to develop a competency framework that touched upon 3 things. One is teaching and learning competencies, another is leadership competencies, and another is educator skills and dispositions. We thought it was really important to articulate educator skills and dispositions so that we were modeling and emulating deeper learning. And we really believe that by integrating and unlocking these educator skills and dispositions, we're unlocking the potential for these educators to transform the learning experience for students and outcomes in their districts far beyond the reach of the program if we can really create this experience the way we want to. So looking a little bit more specifically, here are the skills and dispositions that we articulated for educators. I'll hold back from reading for you guys. I'll just give you a chance to scan those. You'll see in some ways there's overlaps with what we really want to see in our students. But in this case, we're really valuing continuous learning, educators unlocking their own agency as key participants and leaders in the change process, bringing equity front and center to the work, and making sure that we're really valuing educators and their professional collaboration experience. And we really wanted to make sure that we were blurring the lines between teacher leaders and school leaders and district leaders, so that we're really asking that all levels of the system champion change, so that when leaders do move on and or transfer, we're building the capacity to lead change at all levels of the system. So in terms of leadership competencies, you can see the set of competencies we have here. It's really a combination of visioning, being able to lead change in adaptive ways that distribute authority across the system, building key parts of the infrastructure for competency-based education, so ensuring that we have systems for monitoring and support, for example. We're leveraging technology to personalize learning, et cetera, and that we're really focusing on transforming the professional learning experience within the system. And then last but not least, ensuring that we're building deep skills in competency-based instruction, competency-based assessment, being able to leverage competencies, and then at the heart of this, really focusing on creating relationships, cultivating dispositions in students, and creating an overarching culture and environment where student learning and the student perspective is at the center. So within each of these competencies, we created performance indicators, and those performance indicators then align to an array of performance-based assessments. We really wanted to make sure that those performance-based assessments were something that educators could access as soon as they were ready. So in any case, educators based on self-assessment and support from faculty can jump straight to assessments. There's not required coursework, especially when it comes to the teaching and learning competencies. What I'll also say about the assessments is they really ask teachers and leaders to demonstrate proficiency in the framework, and proficiency in the competency frameworks really ask for transforming your environment. So it's not regurgitation of knowledge. Certainly knowledge is important. It's not isolated skills. Certainly skills are important, but it's truly being able to transfer actively and in the present time one's own skills by really demonstrating the impact one has currently on teaching and learning, and then within the leadership competencies, being able to transform structures, systems, and the culture around to enable competency-based learning. So we wanted to make sure that we were deeply respectful and centered around the adult, just like we want to do with students. So we want to really attract multiple personas in the program at all levels of the system. So teacher leaders, school leaders, and district leaders, and we find that our vanguards of transformation are most effective when we have multiple people at multiple levels of the system engaging in that learning. And as I mentioned before, we want to blur the line a bit in the design of the program so that we're building the leadership capacity in teachers, and we're building deep teaching and learning leadership competencies in leaders so that all levels of the system are galvanizing around the key elements for change. We want to make sure that the experience is authentic and relevant as well. So every person in the program has a learner profile, and those learner profiles are really central not only for the advisory function, but also for faculty to support. So we helped our learners identify personas that made the most sense for them as learners. So they might be a structure Sam, or an ending Emily, or a differentiated pathways Polly, and we wanted to kind of raise that to the level of metacognition for them, so they knew that they have multiple learning pathways and ways that they can engage in the program, and that there were ways for us to know them deeply. In addition to that, we didn't want a set of isolated competencies and courses, even though they're very interrelated. So we asked educators very early on in the program to articulate a problem of practice that really represented a felt need that they felt on a daily basis, that if they could solve that, they can make great gains for students. And so at multiple points in the program, we have them pause from their course and assessment experience to say, okay, let's pull all the way back. How is your learning experience now inform your problem of practice? How is learning about learner-centered culture, for example, helped you unlock that apathy that you felt your students had? How are you seeing your problem of practice perhaps differently? Oh, let's pause again. Now that you've learned about competency-based assessment and competency-based instruction, how is that also helping you unlock the ownership your students have in their learning? And then ultimately what they do is they present their learning in an integrated story at the end of each of the program blocks through an exhibition of learning or defense of learning, where they're telling the story through the lens of their problem of practice of how they use their course and assessment experience to really tackle that problem of practice and what the results of that was on learning and their ultimate systems and structures. We're also making sure that given the different profiles in our program, we're differentiating our assessments, both formative assessments and summative assessments at key places, so that folks who, for example, design directly learning experiences and assessments and implement those have authentic tasks that ask them to do just that in their practice. But also if we have specialists, if we have leaders in the program, we're also supporting them in authentic tasks to transfer their learning in ways that are really meaningful and job embedded for them. We wanted to make sure that we honored the fact that learning is both individual and collaborative. So we made sure that at key points, especially with the leadership competencies, that we were asking for folks to engage in courses and also in assessments in a collaborative manner. But that at the same time, just like we want to do with students, there are very important individual components to reflect on one's contribution. So here's a window into a couple collaborative and individual tasks. This is from the What and Why of Competency-Based Education course. So you'll see here, we ask district teams to really apply their coursework by evaluating the strengths and areas for growth in their local district or school context. So they're really taking the CBE design principles and saying, where do we have current assets and strengths? Where might we have gaps? And what might be an agenda for collective learning and transformation from there? But then simultaneously making sure that there are individual opportunities to reflect and process on learning that also connect directly to those educator skills and dispositions. So folks have a chance to really step back and say, how have I collaborated? How have I contributed to my team? And how have I also unlocked my own ability to continuously learn as a result of this experience? So this is a kind of a zoom out from the design principles as it's currently designed, and I'm sure we're going to go through multiple iterations, and this is a wild and fun prototype right now, but as it's currently designed, we have 3 blocks, and each of the blocks has a combination of in-person time and then asynchronous learning, both individually and collaboratively based on the course tasks. And then we also have a culminating defensive learning where we come together again to really tell the story of our learning and also to have the time for teams to really tell their story of transformation and to get feedback from one another and faculty. As I mentioned, individual defenses of learning are anchored in those problems of practice. And then team presentations are really anchored in the work that teams have done to sharpen their vision, to create transformations in their culture, to make movement in different parts of their systems and structure to really enable competency-based education more fully in their local context. One of the most important roles of faculty, just like one of the most important roles of educators in a competency-based system, is to really provide continuous feedback in a way that's really individualized and anchored to the competencies. So courses are created and self-paced. So one of the key roles of our adjuncts is to work with our learners to monitor their learning and to provide feedback in targeted ways so that they can improve their knowledge, skills, and dispositions, and that the culminating task doesn't feel like a surprise if and when they're successful. So we're learning a ton. It's pretty powerful. So one of the most important lessons we've learned so far is about dosage and intensity. We're finding that starting a little bit slower and then allowing educators to pick up speed over time is going to be really important. So we knew this was going to be a challenge, and the challenge was even more palpable than we thought. This is a very different kind of learning experience that requires a lot of agency and ownership on the part of educators. So we're learning a lot about, particularly within the structure of block 1, how to start a little bit smaller and how to create more reflective moments so that educators can really get a deeper sense of what's going on, so that then as we pick up steam and unlock multiple competencies, they have a lot more confidence and ability to self-direct their learning. And I would say it's always a dance, and I'm so grateful for our partnership with Wendy to figure out how to work within federal requirements and university structures to really make competency-based education work. the reality is that's what's happening with all our schools across the country. So it's no surprise. And in many ways, it's a great form of empathy for us to think about, how do we do this dance when all of us have one foot inside of a traditional system and one foot in a personalized competency-based system. And we have to get really creative and collaborative to figure out how to continue to navigate. So that's been a wonderful creative challenge to think about a divergent and creative solutions to do best by our learners within the structures that exist. So I'll open it up before we send you guys off to talk about your takeaways. Wendy, Adam, anything you guys want to add? And then if anybody's monitoring the chat, let me know if there are particular questions that we're seeing from participants before we head off to do some breakout room collaboration.
Ali, I would want to echo a couple things that you so articulately mentioned, one of which is how tricky it is to give people something that they've asked for when they're not so sure it's something they want. Which I think is one of the things that we're feeling and understanding when we realize that there are a lot of creature comforts in a standardized system, that when you are entering into a personalized system and all that demands, those all of a sudden become front and center. And so as we keep moving forward in this work, being able to really isolate the best ways to support teachers through a transition into that in a way that they can also be metacognitive about what that means for their students, because they're likely going through a similar transition. I think that's front and center in our conversations. And from the university's perspective as well, I mean, our university is known, we have tens of thousands of learners who learn in a competency-based system. We have competence-based programs we deliver all over the world. And yet there are many people at our university who will wonder, oh, but when does this grading period end? You know, so just, it's a toggle. It's always a toggle back and forth, and finding ways to find the opportunity in that will enable our innovation to be stronger, I think, is the work that is most inspiring as we move ahead together.
Yeah, I think that was very well said, both Ali and Wendy. I think one other perspective, so as an organization, we really focus on district transformation. And I think in this case, we have so much excitement and I would say confidence, but I think right now it's hope trending toward confidence that delivering this program to a district-based cohort, you know, with a mixture of roles, teacher leader, ideally building leader, other support leadership roles, and being clear with the central office what the conditions are to support learners in this, I think is a key learning. I think we went into it with lots of good ideas, but I think we're kind of documenting those ideas. So in our next cohort that begins in, I think, 5-6 weeks, I want to make sure that we're much clearer with our district partners, our superintendents and their senior teams, about how to set these learners up for success, because there's so much enthusiasm in our districts for these learners to be a vanguard of acceleration and or beginning a process of transformation. Also,
the importance that this is a shared experience. You know, this is an experiential learning opportunity at its heart. And this being shared within people within the same district or neighboring districts, as you know, depending upon the size and various parts of the country, I think is pretty instrumental in its possibilities, as Adam mentioned. So it's exciting work.
Yeah, and we are exploring, just before we transition to your voices, we are exploring, this program is launched in New Hampshire, and we're in conversation with 5 other states around the country, where there's real enthusiasm to support a desire to scale competency-based education in the state. So we will roll out a next cohort in New England this summer, and then in the fall and winter, we'll be rolling out additional cohorts. So if there's interest in learning more, obviously follow up with us.
Thank you, guys.
All right. So we would love to give you some time and space to talk about your learning. You know, what from this conversation was helpful? Where were there ahas? And or what's the context for change in your communities? Okay, we can go to the next slide. So for those of you on the call, we are going to create breakout rooms, which will just be kind of spaces for 3 or 4 of you to have a conversation. And again, we'd love for you in those conversations to rethink credentialing. You know, what is happening in your context to rethink credentialing, and or what are questions that you're having as you listen to this conversation.
And as we shift to breakout rooms, I'll also say we're really curious to harvest your insights. So if one person in your breakout room can commit to sharing your questions, your takeaways, et cetera, in the chat, I think that'll be really powerful for all of us to socialize our learning from our smaller groups.
Excellent. All right.
So as these breakout rooms happen, I'll just do a quick narration. You're going to see something pop up on your screen that says in 60 seconds, you'll be in a breakout room. So know you can actually click and not just wait for the clock to tick all the way down. You can click to join that breakout room as well.
Yeah, it looks like we have folks hopping in.
Okay. Welcome back, everybody. We had a rich conversation. I hope you all did as well. And I'm wondering if we've got a few minutes left. Anybody interested in just sharing kind of any ahas that emerged for you in your side conversations from the presentation? We can wrap up in the last couple of minutes, but we've got a few minutes. So I'd love to hear if anyone has something just so exciting they want to share it with the whole group.
Can I chip in and share something?
Please, I would love it.
All right, this is Mary Albert. I was speaking with Elaine from the Colorado, and the synchronicity that the Colorado Education Initiative is doing some amazing things, which Adam and I had talked about last Friday. And so I'm looking forward to really delving in and learning more about the great work that CEI is doing in Colorado.
Excellent, Mary. I just invoked them in a conversation we were having with someone from Colorado and someone from CCSSO just now. So that's great.
Yay.
Any other kind of ahas? Anybody want to share anything else?
I'll just share one quick comment that one of our colleagues said, which is just how important it is to make sure that if we're going to hold students to the idea of this growth mindset and so forth, that we do the same thing to teachers, and how important it is to work on the mechanics of the district and the state policies. Because in theory, there's a lot of support, but not really. And so it's got to become real in order for this to work and make sure it's parallel for both. Otherwise, it's not fair for either group.
I think that's a great point, Scott. I think, using proof points like we hope this program will be as a way to really push the envelope, and then holding that up with partners like CCSSO, like iNACOL, to encourage state policymakers to consider different options, I think makes a ton of sense. And not deluding ourselves about policy. Like, I feel like there's a lot of permissive policy, but not a lot of enabling policy that exists. So how can programs like this help kind of move from permissive, you're allowed to do, to enabling, you're supported to do?
Yeah, and Scott, to your point around growth mindset and paralleling the cultivation of skills and dispositions amongst adult learners, I really, I echo that, and that's a key part of our program design, as we shared earlier. And I think there's a lot of trust that teachers have to put back in the system. This is coming off of more than 15 years of a lot of pressure on teachers. And so empathy is really important, and trust building is really important, and relationship building is really important, so that the kind of, in many ways, hard-earned fear that educators have, we can help to heal some of that so that they're willing to take risk again.
Absolutely.
That's a great set of points.
All right, Allie, maybe we can go to the next slide while any other kind of thoughts are percolating from folks. So justification in PowerPoint doesn't always work as nicely, but these images have a couple of pieces that could be helpful and relevant if you're interested in learning more about what we did here and what we're doing actively in partnership with SNU. So the Catherine Casey piece that that Natalie mentioned at the beginning of the call, there's a 1.5-page caselet on this program in that paper. So that is that link. We co-wrote a blog with Ray McNulty, my kind of co-collaborator up front on getting this going. And then on the Southern New Hampshire website, there's an explication of the program in some more depth. So and thank you, Megan, for putting those in the chat as well. So those are a couple places to learn more asynchronously. On the next slide, there's some synchronous learning opportunities. So Natalie, I don't know if you want to speak to the first one, and I can speak to the second couple. Oh, maybe we lost Natalie because she had to take off. So iNACOL is doing a webinar on the 23rd on Introduction to K-12 Competency-Based Education. We have a couple of webinars coming up that we'd love you to join us for. One, to one of Natalie's points, is with Digital Promise. So we're partnered with Digital Promise on an initiative called Learn Next, which is a Chan Zuckerberg funded OER for educators effort, about 30 free courses, learning progressions, and playlists. So there's going to be kind of a deep dive into micro-credentials with Digital Promise and 2Rev on May 14th. And then another partner of ours, Redesign, that really is a national leader in competency-based ed, is going to be looking deeply at some of their work, I'm imagining, from Idaho, South Carolina, and other places in the country. So those are 3 really great learning opportunities to dig deeper into rethinking adult learning and competency-based education. And Allie, if you go to the last slide, in the remaining few minutes, we can hang out, we can take questions as a full group or as people need to shift. But that last slide just has our contact information. So if you want to reach out to any of us directly. And we can also put it in the chat if if that's challenging to shift that slide. All right, well, thank you all.
I have one quick question, if nobody else does, which would just be the specificity of the kind of competencies for teachers. So I love the direction. I think this is exactly where we need to go, but my lens is always about, for making it real, having specific, clear, demonstrable learning objectives for the learner, whether it's a student or a teacher, and to be very clear about what mastery means. And I don't know whether you guys think about that in the same way, because as I looked at the ones you had, I was thinking to myself the whole time, so how would I know whether an educator had learned these things, and have they demonstrated, and how would I assess that? And to what extent could this be consistent for everybody? Because my view would be, we don't need to all reinvent these. We could do it once and give it to everybody. So how do you guys think about that issue?
That sounds like a wonderful topic.
I'm happy to chime in. I'm having a little bit of a connection issue. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I was saying
okay, great.
that,
so I didn't. Oh, go ahead, Wendy.
I was saying to Scott that given the time, that sounds like a fabulous conversation for another discussion, because what I think is beautiful about the courses is those pieces are really built in. So people are understanding that as they're looking at the performance indicators and what that means. And but obviously, as you can imagine, that's a generative conversation, and certainly one that's going on all over the country. It's a great point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is. Thank you for that. And Scott, I'll say I tried to not get too nerdy in the short time we have, but let's just say tomorrow I have 4 hours of calibration with other people in the program against some pretty specific rubrics to make sure that we are exactly doing that as we are assessing the culminating tasks that are coming in this term. So happy to continue that conversation. We're really trying to walk the talk at all levels, including around performance assessment, validation, calibration, et cetera. And it's luckily it's one of my delights. And hopefully we can spread that nerdy delight across the program.
And Scott, you get a 3-fer, because my 2 cents is, one of the reasons we worked with Chan Zuckerberg and all those partners to build all that free content out is it's there and available. So all of those courses are anchored to free and open and downloadable progressions. And then all of those courses have performance tasks that really look for those demonstrations. So, happy to kind of do a separate conversation with anyone interested to really dig deep in what is free, open, and not proprietary at CC BY. And then, where does the line lie in this kind of course? All right, everybody. Well, thank you all very much. We'll hang out for a few minutes if you have specific questions, but we look forward to hearing about the work you all are leading. And if connections make sense, we'd love to have them. So thank you for the time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Well, no one else is talking. Allie, I want to hear about your calibrations. I mean, because again, this is the key issue. Right? This is all nice theory until you come down to, I've got 6 different teachers I'm working with 200 kids. They're all grading the same objectives, and I need to make sure I've got inter-rater reliability. So
exactly.
If you don't have automated grading, how do you do it?
I'm happy to talk about that more. That's it is both one of the great pleasures and pain points, because it takes, in order for us to really have enough of a body of evidence against the proficient performance indicators, it takes us at least an hour to grade each of our educators. And right now, we have cohorts of 75 that end up in being about cohort of 60, given the natural attrition of the challenge of the program. So it's real. So essentially we use a lot of CCE's validation and calibration protocols, and Megan, who's with us at Two Revolutions, worked with CCE. So essentially, I'll be really tangible. We unpack each of the performance level descriptors in the competency framework to create rubrics. We then each go, when student works and starts to come in, we'll typically do, if we have the time, we'll typically do a think aloud assessment together. So we're unpacking the rubric and having a common understanding. Then what we'll do when we feel like we have enough sufficient understanding, then we'll do some pre-work. So we'll say everybody's going to score this piece of work against the rubric. And then we're going to send our rubrics to each other and notice where we have discrepancies. And then our calibration conversation can really focus on those discrepancies. And then ideally, what we do then is, some additional scoring so that we're seeing that the core instructors who are doing the performance assessment scoring are sufficiently reliable. And then if there is student work where they have questions, they tap on somebody else's shoulder who's one of their key scoring partners to say, you know what, I'm not totally sure with this part of the rubric. What would you say? And have that kind of a conversation. What I will say is when we have a conversation with a teacher and we say, here's our evidence against the rubric, and you're developing your proficiency, but you're not yet there. That's a big learning moment for our educators. It is a moment where those skills and dispositions that we've been talking about really come to fruition, and not falling into a fixed mindset, not falling into a deficit story about oneself, but saying, okay, I got this. I have not failed. This program is not designed to allow me to do so. So how do I use this feedback? How do I make sense of this? How do I make the changes in the work that I need to so that I can demonstrate proficiency? And those are really key learning moments. And ideally, if the formative feedback process has been strong on both ends, right? We're not requiring any coursework or formative assessments, but we're encouraging educators who need those scaffolds on the way to the culminating assessment to engage in those. And then there's been great communication and feedback on the faculty side. And then there's been openness and receptivity to incorporate it. Then it's less of a, oh, what's going to happen, with a culminating task, which is, again, very, very much part of a competency-based learning experience.
But I would assume that the teachers, the learner in this case, they know what the mastery threshold is before they start, right? So they shouldn't be surprised. They may not be wild about it, but they shouldn't be surprised when this happens. Is that right?
Absolutely. And it's like one thing to be like, yeah, of course. And then the other to actually experience it. I think the other piece is we've learned that the fundamental skill of, for example, unpacking a rubric, unpacking a complex performance task, being able to identify evidence in one's practice that aligns to the rubric. There are a lot of skill gaps that we're noticing. A lot of our educators have. So one of our many learnings is that we need to balance high-level program overviews with deep relationship building and deep skill building very early on in the program, so that those skill gaps don't interfere with an educator's ability to demonstrate their knowledge, skills, and dispositions. And I would also say our current system, many of our educators were drawn to educate because they loved being learners in a traditional system. And so we're asking them to be very different. The traditional system rewarded being right over being creative and taking risks. And so just having empathy and really a lot of tools in our toolkit to deeply coach educators around making that big transition. It's like almost an identity shift for them, right? It's that big, is a big part of the program, and requires some pretty significantly skilled coaching and responsiveness.
Can I ask a quick question on that, Ali? Is how much do you involve people, the teachers, in their own self-assessment? How much of it is there?
Yes, absolutely. What we have them do as part of their kind of early experience in the program is to self-assess against the entire competency framework. But we tell them, so we don't overwhelm them, this is an art and not a science. So what we ask them to do in their learner profile, what are their strengths against each of the competency framework sets? So teaching and learning strengths, leadership strengths, skills and disposition strengths. What do they see as their gaps or their areas where they want to grow? And what are their passions and interests? And then on top of that, for their strengths, we ask them to identify specific artifacts from their practice and hyperlink them into their learner profile so that over time they could look back at their growth over the course of the program. what we found is, I think, one, that because of the difficulty and the skill gap in some of our educators and actually knowing what evidence of practice looks like, there were some gaps there. Some were pretty far along the curve. And then number two is my favorite psychometric phenomenon, which is the Dunning-Kruger effect. You don't know what you don't know, right? So when people are more novice, they tend to inflate their self-assessment. When people are more expert, they tend to deflate. And so, you know, it's difficult to make it a science when it comes to the self-assessment. So what we're really trying to do is use the self-assessment as a way for the learners to look back over time and tell the story of their evolution. Again, more of the story of the learning, a little bit less of the science because of the imprecision that fundamentally exists. That said, self-assessment as a continuous process to promote metacognition is really helpful. So we're having learners not only, you know, at the beginning of the program and at key points in the program reflect on their growth, but also within courses, really looking at course objectives against modules to say, what feels like the most important learning priorities for me.
Mm-hmm. And is this the Learn Next platform that you're working with, or a different one?
Yeah, we're using the Inspired platform, and then we took the Learn Next courses through a very rigorous revision process against the design principles and the competency frameworks that are part of this new master's program.
So you modified that?
We did. We like kind of hair standing on end modified without, you know, going back to the drawing board.
Okay. And you use a learning management system for longitudinal portfolio building?
We're in the midst of partnering with SNHU to move to Brightspace as our primary LMS. And we have learned that an LMS is absolutely vital to holding on to all that data in the most efficient and user-friendly possible way. And so we're definitely working within the Inspired/Learn Next platform. And it's working, and our learners are excited for us to take and to make a shift to kind of get some of the technological hurdles out of the way so that we can really focus on the learning.
Great. I'd love to learn more about that part of it too.
Yes, that's been one of the many, you know, pain points and adventures as part of this too.
Okay, great.
Thank you for your questions.
Yeah.
Well, so Adam, is it okay to keep asking questions? I don't know what your all's time is, so I don't want to be rude if you guys are planning to end.
I think maybe we should do a separate call.
Okay.
Dig deeper, absolutely. And thank you all very much. And we're excited. Reach out directly. We'd love to continue the conversation. And thank you again for the time, everybody.
For the extra time.
Have a good afternoon.